to all of the audience who have joined us. My name is David Simmons. I'm going to be chairing this afternoon's session, where the all-party parliamentary group for social work will be taking some evidence from a range of witnesses on the subject of models of social work as part of a wider project that the all-party parliamentary group is carrying on to look at how, in a world where the nature of social work is changing, where we've seen different approaches, some driven by government, some driven by local authorities, to both the nature of the profession, the way in which social workers are employed by local authorities and other organisations, and the way in which they're deployed. And with a variety of those things having grown up around the country, some very much supported within the profession, others where reservations have been expressed, it's an opportunity to look at what this means for social work and how that then feeds in to a number of debates, including what happens following the care review about the children's social care system, and the debate about how the future of adult social care, both for working age adults and for those who are older, should be shaped in the light of the financial challenges and the structural challenges that we face. In today's panel, we have Dr. Paul Shadworth, who is a social worker, June Thoburn, who is a social work academic, Maria Stratoulis, National Director, Baswell, England, Patrick Bentink, Senior Practitioner, Camden Council, Sharon Davidson, who is a Principal Child and Family Social Worker and at Surrey, and Emily Noble, who's a practice tutor at Frontline. So what I'm going to do is ask each of them to give a very brief introduction to their organisation, and then we have some structured questions. So each witness will be given the opportunity to respond, share their reflections on that as we go through the session. Also like to just briefly welcome Steve McCabe and Preet Gill, who are the two other parliamentarians who are due to be joining this session today. So perhaps just in order as per the agenda that I have, Dr. Paul Shadworth, could we start with you?
Sure. So my name is Paul Shadworth. I'm a professional officer for Baswell. I'm also a social work researcher, and I'm also in practice as well. So the main messages that I wanted to say, or the main phrases, I guess, are that there are many ways of knowing, and the other thing is that everything is fallible, and that when we have evaluations about best models, it must come from meaningful, ethical, valued-based places of co-production with social work practitioners, but also really importantly with the children and families themselves. So notice these are kind of values, and these, what I would argue, that underpin social work. So let me go through those things. So there are many ways of knowing. So I've seen a shift over the years to preferred ways of evaluating interventions and models and approaches. And I've seen some research organisations claim pretty large contracts to do evaluations, or these organisations kind of farm them off to others as long as they comply with Department for Education's current rhetoric, such as randomised controlled trials, etc. This can mean that vital data is missed, and there can be a monopoly on how we should know. Now, monopoly and control is never a good thing, especially in a democratic society, and even more so when it comes to knowledge and production about vulnerable children and adults. So my research background really suggests that we should widen our scope when it comes to evaluations, rather than just confining it, constraining ourselves to particular methodologies and way of knowing. The other thing that I was talked about is everything is valuable, and this links with what I've just said. So evaluation literature, evidence-based practice literature, is now really clear that you can't just transpose one way of working, some ways of models to another. So there's too many variables in decision-making and the application of those models. So the last point joins everything together, and that's evaluations must be meaningful and ethical when we're looking at models. Social work theory is a thing, and as people with experience, social work experience, you will know this. So therefore we use social work theory and relate it to different situations. And there's kind of huge conferences and things going on today, in fact, that has really amazing insights and data that's just waiting to be tapped into by central government and by research organisations. So broadly, social work is bound by ethical practice and value-based, and there's a growing progression of social work theories, which we must relate to the using in specific models for certain situations. So I strongly argue that we start from a place of what matters, so a value-based approach. And we don't just shun large amounts of knowledge from social work theory, academia, research, practice, and as I said, the children and families themselves. So we've got to stop confining ourselves and saying that there's just one way of knowing, one method or one evaluation or one way of practice that's applicable to everything. So thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Paul. That was a really helpful introduction. Next, June Thoburn.
Right, okay. Yes, I'm a social worker, educator, researcher, and a member of the Baswell England Children and Families Group. 3 points I want to make to introduce the written submission. First of all, new models for English social work will only make a positive contribution to parents and children's well-being if they're rooted in an understanding of and find an appropriate place within children's well-being. If they're rooted and have the essential characteristics of good practice across social work settings, roles and tasks, everything from foster care, recruitment, through to social work in residential care. Key points are relationship-based training, providing continuity for the family with a worker and a team, and that means a social work team, but also a team around the child and family, a multidisciplinary team. Secondly, they have to be flexible and responsive to the views, special characteristics, abilities, as well as needs of the person receiving the service. Thirdly, they have to be rights-based and mindful of the power differential, and only use coercive powers when that's legally sanctioned and necessary to prevent serious harm. The second main point is it's important to differentiate between new broad approaches or service delivery models, e.g. no wrong door, family safeguarding, secure-based approaches for working with foster families, trauma-informed approaches, strengths-based approaches, and I want to specifically mention poverty-aware social work, which Baswell has written some guidance about. So some of these broad approaches also incorporate specific methods, but these tend not to preclude and mustn't preclude flexibility. So we've got approaches and we've also got methods and models. For example, restorative practice, family group meetings, and some of these have manualized programs. They're whole interventions that require fidelity that has to be monitored. But that might prevent flexibility. An example is functional family therapy, which is quite popular at the moment. And then the third way of looking at new methods is to think about techniques and skills. These can be part of any approach, e.g. motivational interviewing, advocacy, scaling questions, life story work. And I want to add here that familiar words can have different meanings. For example, systems you find all over the place. You can't do social work with children and families without having a systems approach. This is not the same as a specific method using tightly defined systems theory, as, for example, systemic family therapy. Those two are often confused. Systems approach, systemic family therapy, not the same thing. And then finally, the third point, some of the new models have been developed by non-social workers and not in the UK, and most often in risk-based systems such as USA, whereas ours is much more of a family welfare, whole family system, helping system. Most of these are short-term and intensive. If they're used in England, other than in short-term clinical settings, they have to be incorporated into broader neighbourhood-based team around the family approaches. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, June, for the introduction. Our next speaker is going to be Maris Stratoulis. Maris.
Thank you. I'm the National Director for BASWA England, and we are an independent professional association of social workers, and we currently have over 22,000 members. I've worked both in children's and adult social care for over 28 years in the voluntary, charity and statutory sector services across the UK and also in overseas. I'd like to highlight the unique contribution of each family and each child. No one size fits all. Each child has their own race, ethnicity, identity, other protected characteristics, their history and legacy of living within families and communities. There is national variation, as we know, across local practice, service delivery models, and the implementation of models of work. There is diverse variation in terms of terminology relating to the nature of prevention, early help, early intervention, and also it is seemingly small and inconsequential that day-to-day practices such as a worker taking off their coat or getting down to a child's eye level can have a huge impact on the success of social work intervention. Social work intervention is about relationship-based practice. It's about trust, it's about developing rapport, and it's focusing on the welfare and priority of best interest for that child or family. Some of the key messages that we have from our members currently. More children and families are experiencing financial hardship. There has been an increase, and particularly these hardships during the pandemic, of use of food banks, increase in poverty levels. Services continue to be underfunded, and I am aware that today there's been a launch of a particular fund. However, the messages that we are receiving, and also from organisation leaders, including ADCS, have highlighted a legacy of underfunding or short-term investment. There is a lack of investment in prevention and early help, including welfare benefits advice, a focus on community support, and we have seen cuts in terms of children's centres, youth services and integrated services focusing on community prevention. As we know, there has been an increase in referrals to children's social care and the number of children coming into care against a landscape of reduced support. Social workers continue to tell us about the high levels of caseload, the impact of staff vacancies, the impact of a social work profession that is feeling concerns and pressures in terms of burnout. We also have a blame culture that does impact on delivery and morale. Our members have raised concerns that social workers are directly and indirectly blamed for not intervening quickly enough or for intervening too quickly when supporting children and families. Sadly, for some children, care is the right option. Social workers have a legal duty to assess and safeguard children. Navigating a child's right to be protected from harm versus their right to remain in their birth family is a large part of our reflective practice. Studies that evaluate the effects of short-term and individualised and manualised forms of support with clearly defined and measurable outcomes, and clear outnumber studies that engage with long-term community-led and flexible forms of support with large numbers of envisaged outcomes. The impact of the pandemic, as I've stated, has been far-reaching. Social workers are skilled, trained professionals. We must ensure the delivery of children's services is within a context of an equality framework, anti-racist, anti-oppressive and anti-discriminatory practice. It must be direct relationship-based practice, putting children and families at the heart of services, research and evaluations. Co-production is key. There must be a review of the competitions market, and only recently we have heard of another profit provider that is going to potentially go into liquidation and will have a direct impact in terms of children's provider services, both in residential schools for children with disabled children. We are also concerned about the continuing separation and polarisation of children's and adult services. This does not help in terms of informing policy and practice reform. And finally, I'd just like to focus on the ethical and value base of practice, the importance of truly actively listening to the children and families that we work with, to engage with children and families as partners, and to recognise the role of social workers in safeguarding children, the importance of international and domestic statutes, and not losing sight of welfare, wishes and best interests, including the right to food, housing, safety, security, love and aspiration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. Our next witness is Patrick Bentink, Senior Practitioner at Camden. Over to you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Sharon Davidson. I am a Senior Practitioner within the Looked After Children and Care Leavers team. I manage a small pod of social workers and personal advisors. I'm also a member of BASWA's Black and Ethnic Professional Symposium. I wanted to touch on my personal experience in the field. I have been a qualified social worker for 8 years, and I have practiced with children and families for 15 years. I graduated at Goldsmiths College, and this is significant because in terms of my education and my training, it's very much community-based social work is the key. I am a very creative person and a very creative practitioner, and having had the opportunity to develop an understanding of multiple models and multiple tools from different local authorities where I've worked, I am now based at a place where our approach is very much relationship focused social work, community focused social work, and we have a model that is flexible and very much tailored to our families. My main concern is that if we were to go down the road of focusing on a particular model, some local authorities do focus on a particular model or change this quite regularly. We lose sight of our key morals, values and ethics within social work. Anti-racist, anti-discriminatory, anti-oppressive practice is what should be underpinning our work and our practice. I believe that when a model is focused on too much, we lose sight of our practitioners also. I believe that it's key to have a safe space to practice for social workers. We need to make sure that our social workers are upskilled and they are continued to be developed to be able to be creative and to be able to explore what our families need and what our children need. We know that we say that our families are also the experts of their lives and their experiences, and really taking the time to understand where they're coming from and learning about that is key. I find that if you are in a space where you can't be flexible and tailored with the work that you're providing, you end up oppressing that family, oppressing that community. We know that patterns in social work change. We know that issues change and family circumstances also change. And as practitioners, we need to have the tools to be able to adapt and flow with our families and to support them essentially to develop their lives instead of using our power and remaining in that power imbalance and controlling that ourselves. So for example, restorative practice, excellent. Family group conferences, excellent. These are things that, I regularly dip into my toolbox to use depending on the circumstances. My worry is now as we continue to progress, sometimes we move away from community-based social work and our social workers that are qualifying now and developing now, and especially during the pandemic where we are not working so closely together as we once did, we're losing the sight of that. And I just want to focus on making sure that whatever model that we use or any local authority uses or any practitioner independently uses it is just underpinned by anti-oppressive practice, anti-racist practice, and anti-discriminatory practice.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Patricia, for your introduction. So our next witness is Sharon Davidson, who's the Principal Child and Family Social Worker and Service Manager at Surrey Children's Services Academy. Sharon, over to you.
Hi, thank you. So as David said, I'm the Principal Social Worker in Surrey and Service Manager. I'm also the co-chair of the National Principal Social Work Network for England. I've been qualified for almost 30 years as a social worker, and I trained generically, and I think that's important to highlight, because one of the things that stayed with me throughout my practice is to think about the child within the context of their family and their community. I've practiced primarily in children and family social work, so probably at least 25 years or so of my practice has been rooted within children and families practice. And I've worked across all spectrums from the front door right through to children in care and leaving care. And I think that experience is also part of what I want to articulate today. For me, the concerns that I have about, I'm representing my own thoughts, not necessarily the model of practice that the authority that I work in uses, because for me, the model isn't as always as important as the context that the model is applied to. So I think a lot of models and different models work or don't work in different places based on the context by which they've been applied. So I don't have, I'm not a fan of any one. What I'm a fan of is that we're thinking about the child within their context, that we're thinking about the strengths within those families, or we're intervening in a way that is a strength within a strength-based approach. And that, as colleagues have said today, that those considerations are also taken into account the lived experience of that child and family, the ethnicity of that child and family, and their wider family context. And so what I would like to see is that there is the ability for social workers to have a range of skills that they draw on that's rooted in solid social work theories, and that the key is about being anti-oppressive, anti-discriminatory, being holistic in our thinking and in our intervention, and that we have a range of options that we can explore with families, and that I think, as one of my colleagues said, that the last option for some children is coming into the care system, but when they come into that system, they're still being considered and they're still being thought about as individual children with their individual needs and uniqueness that they bring within that context, and that the services and the supports and the models that are applied are helping them to flourish and are supporting them to achieve the best they can achieve with the right supports in place. The other points that I would like to raise, just from my experience over the years, but also in the current role that I have as a principal social worker, my observations and I guess the experiences that other colleagues talk about, particularly principal social workers, is the context in which practice operates. So I think it really is important that the models that are applied, as I said, they're applied within a strength-based approach, but that social workers are able to apply and think about the practice needs for themselves. So they're working in an environment that is supportive of them, that helps them to flourish and helps them to be able to think broadly and widely and creatively in relation to the individual child and family that they're working in. So what I would really want to emphasize is that the importance is a range of options for local authorities and employers of children's social work teams to be able to apply, and that those models suit the needs of the whole child within their community, the child within the context that they're living in, and that we think about social work in a much broader sense, so that social workers are able to support families where there are issues around wealth and poverty, that they're able to support them in those within those contexts, and that we're not at the moment, what social workers are often grappling is that some of the difficulties that bring a family to the attention of social work are things that are not necessarily within their gift to do anything about. So if somebody is experiencing extreme poverty and that's having an impact on their parenting, if those things are not part of the conditions and we understand that, then the intervention needs to be reflective of that change in circumstances. I'll probably stop there because I could probably go on for a lot longer.
Thank you very much indeed, Sharon. I'm sure we're going to be tapping your expertise as you've outlined during the course of the questions in a moment. So our final witness, just to introduce herself, is Emily Noble, who is a practice tutor at Frontline. So Emily, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Afternoon, everybody. I've worked with children and family services for 15 years. I qualified in 2012 on the Step Up to Social Work programme. I then worked in North Yorkshire for 8 years, mainly in safeguarding and working with looked after children and in permanence planning. And I suppose I'm here to talk about my experiences of working in a local authority that is pursuing innovative and new ways of finding solutions to persistent and tricky problems that are faced by children and families. At the start of the pandemic, I was a team manager in a looked after children and permanence team, and I was part of that emergency response as some of the other colleagues here. I'm now the principal practice tutor for the North East at Frontline and supporting the training of the next generation of social workers. So reflecting on my time in a local authority and thinking about the introduction of the strengthening relationships model that they've introduced over the last few years, and thinking about that as a kind of umbrella framework, and then a number of models and tools that sit within that, some of which have already been referred to today. So systemic practice, science of safety and family finding is sort of 3 examples of that. And really tools that help to build effective working relationships with families and also within families, and helping families to identify the problems they may be experiencing, and also to find solutions, and working closely with them to find solutions that are really going to work effectively for them and help them to form networks around children who they love, to make plans together that are going to be sustainable, taking into account all of the complexities that we've already heard about. And we know sometimes when risks do increase and things need to be managed in a different way. I've seen models such as No Wrong Door, already referenced, Mockingbird and Lifelong Links are really focused on helping children to stay connected with the people who are important to them, reducing the turnover of professional relationships, and helping to create stability in placements for children who do need to be looked after, and really helping children stay connected to their family networks, whether that's living in a kinship arrangement or staying connected in another way. And I think another thing that I really wanted to mention is the importance, I think, of the investment in leadership. So I had a number of opportunities to really develop my own leadership as a manager. So I undertook the First Line Leadership Programme in 2016, and later a systemic qualification in leadership and supervision, and really thinking about how that assisted me in thinking about decision making in a context of uncertainty and complexity, and also thinking about my relational approach with my team, with the organisation, and also working with a number of other agencies, thinking about that team around the child and the importance of multi-agency communication and cooperation. And I think that the key for me is relationships as being a golden thread through all of what I've seen work really effectively with children and families, also being aware of the context in which families are experiencing their situation, and really coordinated approach to try and manage some of those barriers as well. I'm looking forward to our discussion this afternoon, and we'd like any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Emily. I'd also like to just welcome Baroness Tyler, another parliamentarian who's been able to join us this afternoon, which is great news. So the structure of the questions that we have, if I may, I'm going to perhaps put them to the panelists in reverse order. And starting off, in terms of the inquiry, it'd be really useful to hear about your experience of the different models and whether, as a result of that experience, you would advocate for any particular model. So perhaps, Emily, if we could start with you, and I'll go back through the other panelists. And please, if any panelist particularly wants to respond to a particular point, if you want to just put a note in the chat, but I'll try and give everybody a chance as we go through the question session. So yes, Emily, experience of different models and whether you'd advocate for any particular one.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's probably come across strongly in what I've said so far is that I really think relationship-based practice has a great deal of strength to it, working with families to help them understand their situation, identify what problems they're experiencing, and also think about what solutions are going to help them and be meaningful for them. I think working with families feels very different to coming to a family and telling them what they need to do to change a situation. Is a lot less effective than coming alongside and working collaboratively and really co-producing a solution that's going to really be sustainable and really helping families to be set up to succeed, thinking really holistically in their community, what are the barriers that are making the situation worse and more difficult for them to overcome, and thinking about that from a system approach, as well as thinking about the relationships and what solutions and support there may be within a child's network that exists already. I've really enjoyed is maybe not the right word, but really focused on thinking about who loves this child, who's connected to this child, who's already invested in helping this child to stay safe and well. And how can we mobilise that network through a number of different tools that we've heard mentioned, and there will be others, for example, sort of family group conferencing and family finding, to really explore a network and think about people, thinking about those people as whole people. So somebody in the network may not be able to care for a child, but they may have a strong relationship with a child and may be very important to that child and be able to contribute something different to the safety and stability of a child. So thinking really creatively about what those solutions might look like. So I think I've had a really positive experience of working in a relationship-based way and seeing a number of tools. I think sometimes it's helpful to think in terms of stories, and I worked in North Yorkshire really closely with the No Wrong Door model, and just seeing, thinking of children who have maybe had a really high turnover of care placements with carers struggling to meet their complex needs, and actually the No Wrong Door hub model, where they have a sort of extended family network of support around them, where they can move into a hub, develop really strong relationships with a strong professional team of carers, two of whom are also foster carers, so they can be much more dynamic in that support that they provide. And also thinking about who else is in the professional network to support those children. The No Wrong Door model has a life coach embedded in each of the hubs, and a speech and language therapist to really help with communication, and just seeing that those professionals all come together to really help those children to become more settled, and to then really help the development of those relationships, and help them to heal relationships maybe with family or other people who they've become disconnected from. And I've seen children go home really successfully, having been cared for in that model. I'm conscious as well, a similar model, seeing Mockingbird work. I don't know if you're familiar with that as a model of supporting foster carers. So imagine a wheel with a hub in the middle, and that's a very experienced foster carer with a great deal of experience and skill, and their role in supporting a number of other foster families around them. So children who maybe have a higher level of need and who may be at risk of having a higher turnover of relationships with foster carers can actually have a smaller number of key relationships with foster carers who get to know them really well, who can support with sleepovers and short stays, advice, peer support, social activities, and seeing that model really work effectively for children who need that higher level of support. And I think thinking early on in that work with families, seeing things like family group conferencing to help networks really come together and find solutions and having a really family-owned plan, and thinking about, it's not always the social worker who's doing all of this, but thinking about how that works as a system, working with other colleagues and professionals, and the relationships in that network being really essential to that working.
I think Baroness Tyler has a particular question at this point that she'd like to raise. Baroness Tyler.
Yes, thanks very much, David. And just very briefly, if I can introduce myself, I'm the co-chair of the All-Party Group on Children, and I'm on the Lords Select Committee on Public Services. We're currently conducting an inquiry into vulnerable children. I'm really interested to hear about this relationship-based approach, which I think is absolutely right, and working with the family. In the evidence we've received both on the All-Party Group and the Select Committee, one of the constant sort of issues coming back at us from children and families is about the very high turnover of social workers, and how difficult they feel it is to build up a relationship with a social worker who almost inevitably is sort of moving on, or it's someone new the next time. And that's come up time and time again. And I just wondered how well you felt that relationship-based model worked when you do have high turnovers of staff.
Yeah, I think that's a system-wide challenge for us all to be really thinking about. And I suppose one of the things that I've noticed really well is that investment in leadership. So when social workers feel well supported and feel contained and able to kind of hold risks and make decisions, that helps to create that sense of stability. I think relationships are critical and absolutely important, even in circumstances where those relationships are short-lived for some reason or other. And I think we can still be thinking really carefully about how we introduce ourselves to families, and how we manage those endings if social workers do leave, so that families don't experience just a new social worker turning up one day and they had no idea that was going to happen. Thinking about how, I've certainly supported social workers to do goodbye visits, to think about writing letters to children so they have that information, and have an explanation as to why that change has happened, and thinking about really how we manage those relationships when they start, when they're progressing, and at the end as well.
Thank you very much, Tida. As promised, I'm going to go back, and there are a couple of other panelists who have particular interest in this topic. We'll give everybody the opportunity. So as I promised, in reverse order, Sharon, you're next.
Thank you. I guess for me, I've worked over the years within authorities and with employers that have applied different models. I currently work in an authority where the family safeguarding model is the model that we use. I've worked previously within the context of signs of safety, and I think all of them work or don't work, as I said before, depending on the context in which they're applied. So I've seen very successfully a model applied when it's owned by the whole system. So it's not an individual manager trying to implement it with no resources or with no support from strategically as well as operationally. So I think that, and the other thing I'd add is that for me, the most important point is that the model is working with the strengths of the family, and that the family and the child are part of the solution, or they're certainly part of helping reach a clearer understanding about what needs to change or what needs to be included to support the child, and that there are other approaches and tools that support that. So one of the things I like about the family safeguarding model is that it's not about just the social worker and the social worker's intervention on its own, that worker is part of a professional network of others, and that you're thinking about the child in the context of the relationship with the child's parent or carers, and support being in place to support them. So, what's been at the core of my practice throughout as a practitioner, as a manager, and the roles that I am in now, is being able to think about how do we work with the child within the context of its family, and if we can't address some of the issues for the parent, then we're not necessarily going to be able to move things forward successfully for the child. And having resources within the authority. So I work in an authority where, but you know, there are, like lots of authorities, resources are not infinite, but I work in a context where, because of the size as much as anything and the connectiveness between partner relationships, the child and family context is a system-wide approach. So we're thinking about colleagues within health or education and having those constant discussions about how do those parts make the whole for the child, so that team around the child approach. But I've also worked in authorities, I've worked in London authorities, for example, where the issues around poverty and the issues around housing are such that they're overwhelming for the whole family context, but the actual capacity of that authority to be able to implement a model that's holistic and strength-based is hindered by those other factors. So you have committed workers, but actually, you know, if you know, I've worked in authority that recently has come into the attention around its issues around housing. And I can think about some of those workers that are still there, that were there when I was there many years ago, who I know are very committed and would be equally as distressed as a family about the context the child is living in, but would be constrained and limited in what they can do. The other point I'd make is the question about retention and recruitment of social workers. I think the context social workers are working in is part of the challenge. I think part of the challenge is that we have, from my experience, we have a bit of a polarized approach. We've got, you know, a run of new and developing social workers, and we've got more experienced practitioners, but a lot of those may have well moved into management. And what we don't have in the middle sometimes is a sufficiency of experienced workers in practice. So if I'm a newly qualified social worker coming into practice now, and if I think about the newly qualified social workers in my own authority who have trained, their final placements were during a pandemic, and they are practicing in their first year of practice, and they don't have the colleague that they can just ask those day-to-day questions, or they can listen to how they resolve issues. That has an impact on how I'm going to be able to think about and address the challenges of the individual families. And if you have if you're working within a context where there isn't the tools, so you know, if you're working with a family safeguarding model, but there's no ability to implement and think about motivational interviewing, for example, as a technique, then that model becomes difficult to take life in terms of an individual child and family. So I suppose my kind of reflections on the question, the earlier question about a particular model, I strongly believe that it's the ability to think about the relationships that social workers can practice, the tools and techniques and the training and the support they have to apply different techniques, different models to the individual circumstances of the individual child and family. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. A very strong sense from your contribution thus far that it's very much about what you do rather than the model itself. It's about following the right principles, which we'll talk a bit about in a bit more detail in a moment. Patrice, would you like to make a comment about this question?
Yes, I'm going to be mindful that my colleagues have touched on a lot of what I would have said. So I guess just to add, and I know I touched on this already, but it is really about strengthening the practitioners in using the tools available to them. So I think relationship-based practice is important. I think systemic practice is really important. I think that strengths-based practice is very important, and it's about supporting social workers to make decisions within a multi-agency capacity, in a multi-managerial level capacity. So I'm fortunate to be practicing at a local authority where the model has been embedded for a very long time. And I'm practicing in a space that is safe, where I can be really creative with what I tap into and when. And part of that systemic work is having loads of spaces where I can reflect. So I have loads of spaces where I lead on and other people lead on, where we can discuss cases, and we encourage each other to learn about how we explore risk and how we explore the context for that child. We have spaces where we can discuss how we dig deeper, because a lot of the outcomes we want for our children, great, right? But it's about digging deeper, thinking about the social graces, thinking about all the different elements of a child's life and that family's life, and actually contextually, what does that mean for the risk, and giving practitioners the space to think about that, so that their plans and the tools and the models that they do use are just very much targeted to that family in a way that isn't going to oppress them and discriminate against them. And depending on who comes into the community that week or that month or that year, there needs to be a lot of flexibility, however, underpinned by the strengths of that family, underpinned by building relationships. And how do you then build relationships if you're not understanding all the elements of their social graces and their identity and their journey and the expectations for their children, the expectations for themselves? So for me, equally, like Sharon had mentioned, it's about the practitioner having the choice and the flexibility, but also having the drive, the push, the mentoring from other peers and managers to really dig deeper and have an understanding of who that child is and that family is. And some models, I would say, are a little bit more rigid than others in terms of being able to make that happen, or I guess change the focus, moving it away from the child and the family and onto something else, then the child should always be paramount for me.
Thanks very much indeed, Patrice. So I know a couple more panelists have asked particularly to come in. So Maris, we'll come to you next, then June, and then Paul Shadworth, before we move to the next set of questions. So Maris.
Thank you, David. A lot's already been covered in terms of what I wanted to say, but I did want to come back to the point that Baroness Tyler raised. I think it's really critical because it's about cause and effect. And within all of the models, relationship-based practice has got to be core. There's no doubt about it. And the relationship with children, the relationship with families and communities, and also our colleagues and allied professionals, health, education, police, adult services, integral to effective collaboration and working. However, none of this is actually going to work if that social worker is off sick, there's vacancies within the team, there is low morale within the team, and also from a system leadership perspective, that you do not have leaders who understand both the strategic issues, but the day-to-day operational realities for social workers. And you will have some leaders that in the old age, shall I say, walked the job. You know, now we're looking at kind of that remote connection with their workforce, but there are some real challenges in terms of the differences of what day-to-day social workers are experiencing and the resource investment at the top, and also the separation of policy reform and practice. The concerns that we have is that in terms of doing good social work and delivering whatever model it is, because there are strengths and challenges with all of these models, it is about relationship-based practice for social workers as well, giving social workers the time to do the job in terms of direct relationship work with children and families. It's about continuous professional development for social workers and post-qualification training. it's about the opportunities for social workers to have reflective supervision within a conducive working environment that creates those safe spaces that Patricia's just talked about, and Sharon and Emily, about the importance of really solid professional supervision where there is an opportunity for critical analysis in terms of the way that you are working with children and families. And I'd also like to emphasize in terms of the messages from children and families, there's one particular source I just wanted to cite, which is the Bright Spot research by Quorum. And the messages from children are, recognize our potential, recognize my aspiration, give me praise. I want to hear real positives about my progress and what I'm doing. And these are the things that really matter. The social work that notices, when that child is sad, the social work that is recording the information of that child's life story. So whichever model we adopt, please do not forget the impact of the social work environment, their professional training and development, and the leadership support. And finally, I would also say cross-party at a government level, and in terms of our public-facing image within the media, the profession could really do with a shout out and a call out for the fantastic work that social workers do. And sadly, there is far too much of a negative narrative about this profession. And I would strongly say that that is something that collectively, and Basil works very hard at this, but collectively, we all need to make sure that that recognition and public understand the work, the valuable work that social workers do every day and at the weekends and in the evening. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Maris. June, you're next.
Yeah, I again wanted to pick up on Baroness Tyler's comment about continuity, and particularly to talk about innovations. I think you've got the message, beware of magic answers. You'll have people coming to you, selling you with your nice little packages of what works. Just to add on to what Paul said here, it's easy, what works, it's very easy to say whether something's worked. If there's an intervention, beware of interventions that has a beginning, a middle and an end, and then you claim your money at the end of it. And probably the outcome is, did you keep the children out of care? It's not so easy to evaluate a mother who has succeeded against all the odds in parenting her child, or the child who's doing very well after maybe 2 or 3 broken placements in care and then settling well and having a good social worker. So I just wanted to say something about interventions, intensive interventions. As a researcher, I've looked at one of the ones you get is very popular at the moment, functional family therapy. I have real problems about imported interventions that are developed, as I said, in risk-based situations, with very much on the basis of insurance-based systems. Really, you get paid when you've got your result. There really is a place for intensive interventions. There are some families, the child coming out of care will need intensive interventions. But go for the homegrown ones. There are some very good homegrown ones. You don't need to look across in Australia or the USA. We've heard about what they are. But what is key to it, back to Baroness Tyler's comment, is continuity. It's not just continuity of social worker, it's continuity of team. And that's where Sure Start was really important, because Sure Start provided continuity of place. And the intensive interventions need to be built on a community practice approach. So you have your community social worker who says, this family is needing something, or this child is needing something very special. We'll bring in this multidisciplinary team. We'll bring in a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a drugs specialist. But that piece of work has then, what you need within that team is the ongoing social worker. You want your area team social worker or your area team recommends that this particular piece of, probably high tech work happens. The area team stays connected with that family, and when that high tech piece of work is done, and troubled families work might come in here, then you've still got a connectedness with a social worker, because there are some families who need episodic work throughout the child's life. And indeed, there are some children, a child might come into care at age 2 and is there at age 18. So continuity is really important. What's a bit scary is innovations that bring in something, it happens, it's done, and then the money runs out and the family's left high and dry. So I really think innovations have to be fitted into innovative models, have to be fitted into the context of community social work. Just fine if anybody thinks it's a bright idea to split off child protection from family support. Well, I'm afraid parents, the families don't, Claire's nodding her head, you're not either an abusing family or a non-abusing family. I'm sorry to say, and I did work in social work for a very long time, families do move in and out. They go through really stressful periods, as do children. And at that point, they need a more intensive service. And then they need, if you like, a maintenance dose. Back again, Sure Start was really incredibly good at providing that maintenance dose so that family knew people they could go back to, family centres, and say, look, we're hitting a spot of bother now. Can I see Joan again? Because she really helped me last time. And what they often get is, no, you can't see Joan. You'll have to, claw your way back through some sort of system. And if you're lucky, we might let you see Joan. That's me.
Thank you very much indeed, June. And again, some points I'm sure will resonate everybody, especially that last point about the consistency of the relationships. I just see Paul. Would you like to come in?
Yeah, sure. I just want to. Oh, can you hear me? Yes. Good. I just wanted to quash that idea of separation as well, just in terms of research. There's nothing in research that says that works anywhere, but also in terms of my practice as well. I did a bit of a piece of practice today, and I went to see a family, which was an assessment. And the idea that you go in without kind of and say, oh, I'm not going to give you any kind of support, or oh, that's not I'm just here to assess and intervene and investigate is just ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. We shouldn't be going down that line. Anyway, I agree, Jean. But I think what's really important here is that what we're talking about is the difference between models and approaches and theories and approaches. This is like, the first few weeks of social work education, first few weeks of social work training, getting our heads around what these different things mean. And I worked with Gillian and had many chats with Gillian in terms of relationship-based practices, and Gillian Roosh, who wrote a book about relationship-based work. And I worked also in Sussex as well, who had a relationship-based approach. And I think it's really important. She makes it very clear that it's an approach. It's not a practice. It's not an intervention. It's not something you do. It's something that's based on values. It's something that's based on approaches. So this idea that we can just, again, going back to what I said earlier, just transport one model that works over here to another. So, we've mentioned Mockingbird. We don't know yet. I mean, that it seems really successful. We don't know yet what that means in terms of permanence for children. We've mentioned family group conferencing. In the last few years, there's been kind of quandaries around whether that's effective or not. And what Work Centre was saying, they're not sure, et cetera, all of this kind of stuff. We talk about, what else have we talked about? But I suppose what I'm trying to get to is, again, it is about, in my experience, it is about the approaches, and it's not just about psychosocial interventions on its own without looking at the context. So context is everything. This is what we've all been saying. It's about approaches, and you put the approach which is underpinned by social work theory, social work values. We put the approach into the context of the family, the context, and social. And when we talk about approaches as well, it's not just individualized. So it's not just about these practitioners. It's not just about everything's on these families. It's about making sure that we look at anti-oppressive practice, we look at anti-poverty practice, we make sure that we look also about how we're anti-oppressive, that we're relationship-based in our work. And, you know, I remember in practice, when you get, and this wasn't with Brighton and Hove, just let me make that clear, it was another local authority I worked with, where they were pushing relationship-based practice and things around trust, yet I didn't feel trust from my managers. I didn't feel safe with my managers. Yet we were asked to do this with our families, yet actually it was quite almost abusive what was happening within the local authority. So it's about approaches that the whole system takes, not just individuals, but the whole system.
Thanks, Paul. The next question that I was asked to put to you was about the principles underpinning each of these models, but you've all been brilliant witnesses in talking about the principles that you expect to see run through the profession, regardless really of the model that operates. So what I'm going to do, if I may, is just move us on to the questions that we face in terms of our circumstances now, which are about the biggest opportunities and also the biggest obstacles that are facing children's social work at the moment. Now, clearly, things like the care review, potential even reorganisation of local government. We've seen the shifts, for example, the unitarisation of a number of county areas. So just changes in the way that organisations operate throughout both challenges and opportunities, and the development of some of these new models, including different forms of intervention from the DfE in places that have had an adverse Ofsted judgment driving some of that. It's been really useful, and perhaps Paul, going back in reverse order again, to have been, if I perhaps start with you and see your perspective on that. So yeah, the opportunities that there are in the current climate, and also some of the obstacles that you might see facing children's social work.
Sure. So okay, I guess in terms of opportunities, what I've seen in the last kind of few years is people beginning to come together. I think actually social work is now people becoming very passionate about it, which I haven't seen for some time. The care review is undoubtedly contentious in some people's minds. In other people's minds, they don't, you know, it doesn't even focus on their radar. It's just something that's been done to them rather done with them. And for other people, they kind of support it. My concern sometimes around things like the care review, around the monopolization of knowledge, is what I talked about before, the monopolization of kind of services, about what's seen as, you know, a bit, it's almost like sometimes there seems to be a bit of a clique that you're either in or you're out of. And I think that's a really, really dangerous place for us to be in. I really, really do believe that actually we should be using and should be looking around and seeing different approaches, different disciplines, different ways of working. All of these things are just so useful for us, rather than us just kind of narrowing our focus, I guess, for me. So the other thing that's really, really important here is in terms of retention and recruitment. I know that that it can either be social work is a privilege. Is one of the, well, I think is the best job in the world, but we're allowed to go into people's lives, and we're allowed to help them to instigate change, both on an individual level and a societal level. That's an amazing opportunity, but it also brings a lot of power into that. But unfortunately, it's very emotional, very emotionally laborious. There's a lot of emotional labor in our work, and I think that gets forgotten a lot. And as social workers, we don't get protected enough, we don't get supported enough, and that leads to recruitment and retention problems. And the last thing that really impacts upon us, I think, is in terms of poverty. And we've been seeing that in the last few years, the way things aren't joined up enough, in terms of poverty for the communities that we work in, and in terms of the kind of the capital that we have for these communities. So we know that these communities, we know that these communities, that we know that they have when I go and assess communities, for example, individuals, we know that a lot of them are isolated, for example. So we need to get communities back together again, and don't just think that all of a sudden, you know, I'm saying, actually, we should be pushing everything onto these isolated, vulnerable communities. Actually, we need to think about community social work, community building, and anti-poverty, anti-oppressive stances.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. Let's move to June. What's your perspective on those issues?
I'll be brief. I'd love to see the government have a really high quality recruitment campaign for social workers. I want to see billboards when I drive down the road of, as I see for social workers. Be a social worker, you can really make a difference. I'm looking at Emily here. I think a lot of money has gone into recruitment for frontline, but that energy has not got into recruiting for all the other HEI university courses for undergraduates, for postgraduates. That's right at the moment. And I think that would make a huge difference, actually, because we need to recruit. We've seen some really good university courses go out of business, and that's really very sad. Yeah, so that's my message. Government, please, high-powered billboards. Social work needs you. Go to your local university, go to your local authority, and get yourself qualified.
So a modern equivalent of Dig for Victory, perhaps, something along those lines.
Absolutely. Honestly, David, I'll tell you, just linked to that, I'm a bit, can we please use social work always rather than social care? It's as if social work has sort of got lost, and social work is a part of social care. It's a very important part of social care, but particularly with the elderly, you know, with adults, we've wrapped it up in social care. And I think somebody said, I think it was Morris, really the importance of training for generic practice. Has anybody noticed that children have parents, and a lot of the problems that children have is because their parents have problems, and therefore generic training is absolutely essential. And then once you're qualified, then you move into specialism through, again, partnerships with your local universities, whether it's about training to be a foster carer, training to be to recruit foster care, training to be specialist in court work, whatever whatever your career. And I think BASWA's PC, Professional Capabilities Framework, is really important as a framework so that social workers can map their way through their career. And that, I think, will get us better retention. I think Sharon and, well, all the people we've heard from have mapped their way through, and they found the training they needed to go down the career route they know. That's what helps social workers to stay around, basically.
Thank you. Maris.
In terms of some of the opportunities, David, I think there are great opportunities to build on in terms of multidisciplinary approaches, the respect and partnership across the sector, as I say, from an integrated perspective in terms of, you know, our partners in health, education, police, but also a community-based level in terms of voluntary and community sector organisations. Sadly, we know there's been a lot of financial hits for those organisations, but if you think of the work that has been happening, particularly during the pandemic, of some of those helplines for people who've been experiencing domestic abuse, the connection at a local level, I think that has been really important. And so I think the opportunities are there in terms of revisiting and really strengthening a social work approach. I think that's critical. As colleagues have said, I certainly would not support a separation of prevention, early intervention and assessment. It's all part of a continuum, and children's lives are not segmented or fragmented in any way. So I think it's really important that we kind of respect that and embrace that as a model of going forward. And I think the strengths of one profession, you know, in terms of some of the ways that I've worked within my past career in direct practice, you know, think family model, family group conferencing, but also team around the child. And what I'd say was also the patch model, the old patch model of working, which was about really embracing at a local level, a place level, you know, understanding the needs of communities. Families and communities know the issues that are going on in their communities. You know, they're the people on the ground who know that, as are faith leaders, organisations. So I think there's real positive strengths that we can build on. The one profession, community-based social work, and a real strong integrated approach. I think some of the threats that we have at the moment is certainly about future policy reform, and I am concerned that the case for change in the review will be about market segmentation. It will be about separation of services, and this is not the time, both children, families and the workforce. I'm concerned about retention. I think that's a real threat, and I think some of the points that have been highlighted earlier are really concerning and serious. And BASWA has undertaken a survey, you know, during the COVID pandemic, initial findings. And social workers, particularly from children and families, are saying to us they're not sleeping at night. They are worried about safeguarding issues. Their concerns about not having direct contact with children and the hybrid ways of working. And these are real. We cannot afford to lose a skilled workforce. It's really important we keep our social workers, and it's really important that we value them. So I think that's a threat. And the policy reform agenda in terms of austerity, you know, just a recent example, the discussions about the uplift of benefits potentially coming to an end. Social workers are meeting children and families who are in a context of going hungry. They are meeting social work, they are meeting families who are living in the most appalling conditions in terms of housing. Families that we know have been involved, whether people like to hear this or not, rough sleeping, you know, kids on the streets, you know, that is happening. That is part of the reality check. And so I think it's really important that it's a national policy reform agenda that is addressed prior to moving into any practice reform and redesigning delivery of services to some of the most vulnerable people in our communities. Thank you.
Thanks, Maris. Before I move to Patrice, Baroness Tyler has a question around this issue. So Baroness Tyler.
Thanks very much, Dave. And I realised I should have said earlier when I came on that I am currently on the board of Social Work England, although my term of office expires next month. It was just picking up that point that June and Maris had already touched on about the sort of the balance of training that social workers are receiving between what I would call the sort of the high-end, crisis-end, child protection sort of safeguarding, where a lot of the focus obviously goes these days, and the sort of the earlier intervention, working directly with families, providing, as I like to think, therapeutic support and well-being approaches. I saw your point, June, about not talking about interventions. And I know some of the social workers we've talked to have sort of said they feel too much of the emphasis is put at the sort of the risk assessment high-end side and not enough on the sort of earlier work with families. I just wonder what you thought about the sort of the balance of the training.
I think what would be really helpful with that point is just to get the views of more recently qualified staff. Certainly from our membership, and the feedback that we get is that the training is generic and it isn't specifically focusing in terms of the higher end threshold model, that it is diverse, and in terms of their placement experience, that is also diverse in terms of those different models of practice. I think one of the concerns is we strongly, as a professional association, do not want to move away from the generic training of social workers. And I think it's really important, going back to June's point, Children are part of families, and children's service social workers need to be connecting with adult social workers. But in terms of the training, I'd really welcome kind of June's comments and Patricia and Sharon, just from their kind of more, and Emily, in terms of recent experiences, if that's okay with David.
So Patricia, you were next on the list, so if I may, I'll come to you next, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I think, yes, my understanding is the training is still very much overarching, covering different areas, not connecting enough with like children's social workers are not connecting enough with adult social workers and vice versa. I know where I am at the moment, the local authority, we're trying to do a little bit of that, but it's still very much poles apart. I would say also, when it comes to thinking about developing an understanding of risk assessing, I know I touched on it earlier, but there's many elements of understanding the family, gathering that information, exploring those really in-depth conversations that unfortunately a lot of the newly qualified social workers are just not being taught how to do that, or with all of the challenges in the pandemic and how we've seen such an increase of cases and challenging work, and Maris touched on poverty, and as you know, I talk a lot about anti-racist practice and all of the challenges within culture and ethnicity over the past many years. Unfortunately, there's not the space to always support newly qualified to start developing their ability to explore and have those conversations. And also other social workers, a lot of the conversations I have with social workers that have been practicing longer than me, 10 years, 15 years, still not quite sure how to have some of those really challenging conversations that actually link really tightly in with risk. I speak a lot about how understanding ethnicity, culture, class, economics, education has a huge impact on the risk and the parents' understanding of what risk that's posed to their children or they're posing to their children. And therefore, how do you develop a child protection plan or a looked after child care plan when you just haven't done that level of digging? I'm going to go back to the initial question about the opportunities and the challenges. And I know that, Paul, you touched on the motivation, the passion, and I think that this is quite huge, especially in the last year of the pandemic and anti-racist practice, but there's a level of activism coming back into social work that I'm really enjoying. And just the confidence in practitioners to advocate for their families in a way that we just maybe have been slightly quiet about the last few years. And I think there's real opportunities for social workers to be taken a little bit more seriously. I think that depending on the other professionals we're talking to or the room we're sitting in, it doesn't matter how passionate or well-spoken you are and all of the other complexities, actually, we're just not taken seriously. So what June mentioned about not calling it social care and calling it social work is actually really key. And there are opportunities for us to be showcased as social workers, especially throughout the pandemic. We did so much work. I've worked consistently through the past 2 years, year and a half, going into the office all the time, even in the management capacity, still doing direct work and dealing with emergencies. And the social workers who are not at risk of COVID, they're working even harder to support those who are vulnerable and giving them the space to stay at home. This isn't highlighted at all. And I think there's some real opportunities to just showcase some of the really challenging work that we're doing. I think that, I just made some notes here, but I think that new ways of working can be a pro and a con. We are having to learn to work differently throughout the pandemic. Bereavement has been huge for social workers and families, and how that overlaps, and the amount of sickness that social workers have experienced because we've caught COVID, or we are dealing with separation and loss ourselves, and then that's triggered and we're going into our families, and how do we juggle that? It's very complex. So that's a pro and a con, but such a huge challenge in terms of doing that advocacy work and doing that activism work, even more so in times like this. it really does take its toll. All the more reason for us to be showcased. And then I wanted to say one more thing. I think just a level of feeling quite overwhelmed, and actually the fact that other services are also feeling overwhelmed. So, you know, we work so closely with the police and the healthcare and midwives and just substance misuse and mental health. Everyone is so overwhelmed at the moment. And I guess going back to our initial question on exploring what approach we do take, thinking about that multi-agency work and thinking how we support each other to support our families is just so key. But one of the huge challenges at the moment, I would say, yeah.
Thank you very much indeed, Patrice. Sharon, I'm going to come to you next, if I may.
So Baroness, I've forgotten the question you asked. I'm really sorry. So what was the key point that you asked?
I think others have sort of come back on it. It was really about the balance of training between the sort of what I call the sort of the crisis end, child protection sort of end, and the earlier support, therapeutic work, working with families, etc. Whether you felt that the balance was right in the current training.
Yeah, thank you. So I agree with colleagues that the training itself in terms of the university training, I think is fair. I think that there is a balance. Some get a bit more than others, maybe depending on the context. And I think that the challenge I see as an employer, and I'm responsible for the newly qualified programme in my authority, and I've been responsible and worked with it and over many years, is that the training is only as good as the placements that students undertake. So the training itself is great in terms of the universities, but if students are not given the opportunity to have their two main placements in statutory services, for example, and then they come into practice, it's a bigger leap. And I think linking this question to the earlier question around opportunities, I think that some of the opportunities that we have, you know, and I'm thinking about the descriptions of levelling, the levelling agenda, I think that we have a cohort of newly qualified social workers who may have come straight from education into social work, but we've got a whole body of experienced adults in the community, sometimes already working within local authorities, that actually their knowledge and their wisdom, if training was available to them, so if employers could have the ability to fund, or the DfE or others were able to fund in-house placements that are linked to universities, then I think you would then have a much broader wealth of people in the profession. And I think that, you know, going back to the point that June made about how the profession is then seen, we're invisible to the public, apart from those individuals who have an experience of a social work intervention, whether that's good or bad. Other professions are not invisible. If, you know, as I said, I've been a social worker for a long time, and I've lost count of the amount of times that people, if I say, what do I do? If a police says what they're a police, or if a doctor says, you might ask what area they specialise in, but, you know, so I think that both adults and children's social work is invisible in the wider context, and the narrative that surrounds it is usually negative. I think the opportunities the pandemic has offered, if that's the right way to express it, is that it's given us, it's given society a spotlight on lots of different people that keep things going, and social workers are one of those very key in professions that keep things going, but they're not considered as key workers in the same sense. So, you know, I think that a real concerted, consistent approach to supporting recruitment nationally and nationwide in the way that other professions have had is something that I think really will help. And we need the balance of age and wisdom. So that you know, a campaign that is talking to our new and aspiring social workers coming through, but also people who've got life experiences, that they can then balance those two things. So the richness I had as a newly qualified social worker was being in a team where I was, there was another person in my team that had qualified just a few months, but there were also people who 10, 15, 20 years in practice, and just sitting and being in awe of them and going out and shadowing with them. And I qualified at a time when it was patch-based. So someone taking me around the patch, someone introducing me to other colleagues, and people getting to know the social workers really was important. So I think that the opportunities to reset the button are here for us. And I think if we don't, the challenges around recruitment intention were part of a concern before the pandemic. The pandemic won't have helped that, because social workers as a profession are tired. So as Patish says, colleagues have worked consistently from throughout the last 15, 16 months, relentlessly. And the sort of working from home has also meant that you're not stopping. So even if the only point you were stopping before was the commute home, you don't have that now. So I think that those things are really important to me to think about. And I think that you know, having social work as a career choice for everyone will come through a concerted campaign of recruitment and it being in the mind's eye of society as a whole. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. Just at this point, I'm going to hand the chair over to Baroness Tyler, just while I sort out a quick technology issue. Baroness Tyler, if I can hand it over to you, and hopefully Emily may be able to comment next in turn.
Sure. Sorry, could I invite Emily? And then I saw that Paul also put a very interesting point in the chat. So Emily first and then Paul, please.
Thank you. I mean, I think what has struck me, I was working in practice at the start of the pandemic, and just seeing the enormous creativity and resourcefulness of social workers really doing their best work and finding, you know, the best solutions to a constantly changing everyday situation. And that strikes me as a real opportunity to think about how can we take the opportunities to think about their creativity and resourcefulness in a way, rather than just going back to kind of the previous ways of doing things, that maybe opportunities to be creative and resourceful in the same ways maybe weren't there. And I think in terms of obstacles, it seems to me that we're talking about anything that gets in the way or is a barrier to social workers being able to do their best work. And I'm mindful, as we're talking about models don't do the work. You know, a model may be brilliant, it may have a great theoretical background, but actually if social workers aren't resourced and have the time and space to think and implement a model, then it has little value. And that is, social workers need, if a social worker has an impossibly high caseload, it doesn't matter how skilled, how well trained, how committed they are. They're only one person and they can only sustain that for so long. And that seems to me as be a bit of a wicked problem in the system when resources are not endless and social workers are a finite resource. So thinking about how do we solve that problem, I think is really tricky. Thinking as well what you were saying, Paul, about the emotional demand on the work, and are there opportunities to think about how social workers are given space to think about the impact of the work on themselves and on their own families, and finding better and more creative ways of developing resilience. I ran a session a few weeks ago through the Practice Network on how can we build resilience through ideas like self-leadership, not ignoring the context that is very challenging, but if we can't always change the context, what are some of the things that social workers can do to build and develop resilience in that context? And I was thinking as well about the need for multi-agency work, and that's absolutely essential, but we also need those multi-agencies to exist and to be there and to be resourced to do the things that they need to do. And if we have cuts in services, domestic abuse or substance misuse, to give two examples, or other youth work projects, if those are not available, it increases the burden on other services to do more of that work. So I think that's an important point too. Just saw something flash up in the chat. I'm not sure if that was a question for me. Oh, sorry, I can't hear you. You're on mute.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think it was about the fact that one of our parliamentary colleagues had to leave, and there were some questions he wanted to ask. And I'm sorry, I wasn't part of the pre-discussion about how questions were going to be asked, so I didn't quite know how that was going to be handled, so I apologise about that. But I wondered, Paul, you put some interesting points in the chat about the sort of saying perhaps that that distinction I was drawing between the investigation sort of risk assessment end and the sort of therapeutic end wasn't actually as clear cut as that. So I just wondered if you could expand on that.
Sure, I don't think it is, and I think I want to speak to. So my research is around children's voices, especially in terms of kinship care, but also my practice experience as well, and me as a practitioner. I know that we're working. It's what I call the in-between spaces. These spaces of competing rights: the right to for well-being, and to be within your family versus the right to be safe, to be innocent. And families, as much as we love them, and I love my family, they can be so great for us, but also we know to some extent they can be harmful to us, and to various degrees. And what we work with, some of the families we work with, let's be really, really clear, there are real risks, real risks there. But a lot of the time it's on that scale, as June is kind of saying. So when we start, I don't think it's the work that I do in terms of my practice, in terms of my research, in terms of what I hear from children, they don't make these things into, this is therapeutic and this is an kind of a child protection investigation. It's kind of in between, the in between that happens all the time. And if we start having kind of these almost investigations, this kind of these police social workers rather than these helpful social workers do horrible things to families. We can't get away from that. We separate children from their families. That's not a nice thing to do, but it is a necessary thing to do. So we have to remember that, we can't just separate the what we see as the nice things with the nasty things. Actually, the whole reason why it's so emotionally labor intensive is because we're thinking about these things every single day. We're working with these things every single day. That's the space, and that's the space that we need to be working in, rather than thinking, actually, just separate it out and make it easier. We can't. That's not how families experience life. That's not how we experience social work.
I think we were due, Kerry, I don't know if you can hear me, were we due to finish at 4:30?
Yes.
Kerry,
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Yes, we were, but if people are okay to go by a few minutes, that's fine. If
people have got another, five or so minutes, I could just pose quickly, I think, what were the remaining questions, and then, if you haven't got time to answer, in a detailed, you can always, respond later. But I think the two remaining questions were about, and we've touched on it a bit, how funding has impacted on types of models being used. And also, if you could change one thing about the way children's social services are delivered, what would that thing be? Which gives you a nice chance to end up saying anything you like. So would anyone like to kick off on that? Let me see. Patrice, would you like to?
Yeah. Oh gosh, it's such a huge question. I often try to describe my practice as being very loving, and sometimes I'm told off for that because that's such a huge word. Yeah. And it's not always nice. Loving doesn't always mean it feels good. And I mean, thinking about a miracle question, if I clicked my fingers, everything was perfect, I would just want social work to be more loving and just more holistically understanding. I don't think that's helpful in this context, but I would definitely think about it from more of a practical standpoint. But I think if I wanted anything for my families was just as social work to just be a little bit more loving, a little bit more patient. Yeah.
I think that's a rather wonderful point, actually. So I was saying, don't try to cover the whole waterfront, but Maris, have you got any sort of quick reflections?
Just on the funding one, Baroness, yes, I think there's been far too much short-term investment in certain models of delivery, followed up by evaluations that becomes an industry in itself. I think children's services is a really long-term investment in terms of future of delivery of services, but also from a model of co-production with children and families. And in terms of kind of going forward, and one of my concerns, I'd really like to put a plea out for, you know, non-separation of services, and also children are not commodities for profit. So I would really err on the side of not going down the route of privatisation of children's services, and for a full review of the cost and the private market sector in terms of the delivery of provision, particularly in terms of children's homes. It's got to stop. Thank you.
Something in the chat, but give a final thought, you know, what you'd like to see change.
I could chip in, and I'm with Patrice here. I trained a long time ago, but I still have this memory of my tutor saying it was about holding. And actually, some families, for a while, nobody wants to have a social worker set on them forever, but some families need to be held. And that just needs a certain set of values. It does need maturity, it needs confidence in the job. And it is tricky when social workers aren't staying around long enough. It's great that your witnesses have much experience, have stayed along. I think it's unfortunate people keep saying that social workers don't stay around. Actually, you've got evidence here that social workers do stay around. Let's find a way of making sure that they do. And they might change careers. They might become principal social workers or indeed academics. But, you know, I'm a social worker. I've never ceased to be a social worker, and I've been retired for 20 years in theory.
Thanks. Thanks very much, June. Emily?
Thank you. Yes, trying to think about one thing I would change is a real challenge, and I would echo what Patricia and June have said. I think as well, removing barriers that stop social workers doing their best work, and maybe the best way of kind of expressing that is having caseloads that are manageable and enable social workers to do their best work and do meaningful work and work with families in a way where change can be achieved, and that the visits aren't just checking that everyone's still okay, and actually creating space for actual work to take place that can actually help a family to achieve change that's going to last. I think I couldn't put that in terms of numerical terms, but that would be my magical thinking wish.
Lovely. Sharon?
I think I would echo what everyone said so far, but also I support the view that Maris has said about long-term investment, because I think the long-term investment in social work and in social work practice means that there is less likely to be that kind of managerial context that people are working in. And so what we can then think about is loving and supporting and holding children, but those children are those social workers are working with managers that are empathetic and compassionate, and that they're thinking about the context for that worker. So as much as I want to love my children, there may be a need for managers to be able to have those safe conversations with me about the appropriateness or not, given my context. And I think that when we're in a context where it's very about, the narrative is still very negative around social work, I think that seeps into how management styles can evolve. So I really want to, I suppose my wish is that practice leadership is leadership that is strong, but it's also one that is compassionate, it's empathetic, and that it creates conditions to enable the best work, as Emily described, safe, open ways.
Thanks so much. And final word, Paul, it'll have to be very brief, I'm afraid, to you.
That's okay. You leave the man to have the final word. It's probably not a good thing, by the way. Just to say, I just feel so passionate today. You guys have really lifted me up. I've just been recovering from my COVID jab. I just want to say one thing, and this is for me. I think we need to start looking at having children's voices in our policy making and a policy decision making and research, and there's not enough of it. And I'm not talking about care experienced adults, I'm talking about children, and having meaningful, ethical ways that we can have their voices in these discussions. That's what we need. So yeah, that's what I would change.
Thanks so much. And I can see that Patricia puts a really important point in the chat about diversity in the workforce and at management level as well. So thanks for that. Look, some really great points. I know we've gone over time. I think David has had to go off to do something else now. So I would like to thank you all very much for giving up your time. Kerry, is there anything you want to say about next steps?
Yes, so the next steps, we'll hear from some organisations at the next inquiry session taking place next week. And after the third session, which takes place in September, we'll be compiling a report which will include all the evidence from these sessions. Great, well, thanks very much. And thank you to everyone. Sorry we overran.
And thank you, all of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Everyone, bye.
Bye.